Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining our live demonstration of AI-powered search for Microsoft Dynamics 365. My name is Rachel Bosley. I work on the marketing team here at Kibeho, and I'm really excited to be part of today's session. I'm also thrilled to introduce our solution engineer on the call today, Paul Sheridan. I have a couple of housekeeping items I'd like to cover quickly before we get started. First, everyone is in listen-only mode. However, we do want to hear from you during today's presentation, so please feel free to send your questions along using the Q&A section on your screen. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive the presentation within approximately 24 hours of the conclusion of the event. Finally, there will be a brief survey at the end of the session, so please help us improve future webinars by providing your feedback on the content and experience. For those of you just joining us, welcome to the live demonstration of AI-powered search for Microsoft Dynamics 365. In a moment, Paul's going to show some great examples of where Kibeho's solution is integrated within Microsoft Dynamics. However, do please keep in mind that our support solution can also be used outside of Dynamics. We have very close integrations with other environments as well. During today's session, you're also going to get to see firsthand how Kibeho can help provide the best customer service available. Now, knowledge has always driven business. People are at their best when they have the most relevant information available to them at the right time and at the right place. And when people think of search, they typically think of a query to content type of relationship. However, Kibeho takes this process to the next evolutionary level, known as an insight engine. So insight engines provide organizations, employees, customers, and partners with the ability to deliver relevancy at scale. This is done in a very personalized and contextually aware way. Kibeho leverages a sophisticated artificial intelligence-based engine that learns from previous digital journeys of how people interact with their content in order to provide the most relevant, best answers and recommendations without having to actually manually tune the platform or the system. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the problems we help you solve. A lot of you may already be experiencing a variety of pain points, such as many siloed content or knowledge sources, or even too much content flooding your system without a lot of relevancy that's tied to it. You may also have no real insight into the effectiveness of your support systems, or even problems with your current and sometimes outdated knowledge delivery mechanisms. So why Kibeho? Well, as I mentioned earlier, Kibeho goes well beyond traditional search by bringing relevance to every interaction that your customers, your partners, your employees, all of those that have that within your organization. So Gartner recognizes that this shift is in the marketplace and acknowledges Kibeho as a clear leader in the insight engine space. And not only do we have great integration and a very strong alliance with Microsoft as a Gold ISV partner, our intelligent support solution has also been successfully deployed in a wide range of industries such as technology, financial, healthcare, and manufacturing with proven results. So what is Kibeho and how does it create this value? Because we bring relevancy to every interaction that customers, partners, or employees have with the organization, we make every experience a great one. And how do we do this? We have what we call the Kibeho formula. First, we access content from across your organization. We reach it securely through a robust set of connectors and tools that we've built up over the last decade, and we pull this into a single index and are able to deliver all that content, for example, within Dynamics 365. We combine this with the context of the users that are searching and what they're trying to do. So if a user is authenticated, we're able to pull in a ton of data from the profile, understanding their best match in terms of other similar profiles. But even without that authentication, we're still able to pull in contextual clues such as their location, the time of day, or even what devices they're using, like mobile or desktop. And we combine all this with behavioral data in order to observe what's worked for other cohorts of users like them with their clickstream analysis and Kibeho Search analytics so that we can determine what will be the most relevant content in their next interaction. All of this added together equals relevance. It's no longer just about search. This relevance is driven using the power of machine learning, and this data science cannot be done by hand. It uses complex algorithms that Kibeho has been working on for the last decade. This combination enables our customers to deliver relevant, personalized content at scale and predicts and recommends what the user needs next. Now, Once you have all the content indexed by Coveo, we build AI-powered search journeys based on your crowd's interactions and profiles. So you'll end up seeing things like automatically boosting certain documents based on previous interactions, but also allowing people to navigate across the collective environment through advanced faceting. This can be metadata that's either generated from your system or things that are actually discovered by the Coveo platform itself. Also, being able to account for various multimedia items such as embedding a video player directly within the search results or even on the side tab. You'll also see recommendations that are automatically generated based on the context of the support case an agent is creating or reviewing. So once you're able to insert the most relevant knowledge in the flow of work, this actually leads to direct benefits such as lowering of average handling time for cases and an increase of first call resolutions and ultimately customer satisfaction. So in a few minutes, Paul will highlight this in his demo, but I just wanted to reflect here on how this can really empower agents to be more effective. As the agent logs the case and begins populating some of the fields, Coveo will recommend content to solve the issue and leverage content across a variety of sources. So this can be content sources such as other cases in Dynamics or SharePoint, OneDrive, Wiki, YouTube, lots of different sources of information. And all that content is served up dynamically. The agent is no longer having to manually query for any of the results. It's just done automatically. What's really great about this is whether your agents are answering phone calls, emails, or chats, they're getting all this relevant information in one unified view. It means your agents are becoming more proficient. They're better able to solve issues, and over time, those routine type of issues are solved by customers themselves through self-service, which is not only more cost-effective, but it keeps your agents motivated and engaged in their jobs, as well as advancing in their careers. Okay, now I wanted to go over one specific customer use case in a little more detail, and then I'm going to hand it over to Paul to do the live demo. One of our early adopters is Tyler Technologies. They implemented Coveo and have already realized some pretty substantial results. Tyler is the largest US provider of integrated software and technology solutions to the public sector, including cities, counties, states, and school districts. They do everything from allowing you to pay your tax bills online to payroll and utility billing. About 2 years ago, Tyler embarked on a journey to knowledge-centered support, or also known as KCS, and discovered Coveo. Their use case with Coveo has been centered on empowering support staff to access a variety of data across various siloed sources in the company. Since they were founded over 50 years ago, Tyler has grown substantially by acquisitions, and they faced decades of accumulated information and data, extensive mixture of commercial software and homegrown repositories, and a variety of different technologies. Now, the combined solution enables them to provide contextualized relevant search results to agents, vastly increasing their efficiency. The sources indexed include Dynamics, their knowledge base, SharePoint, Jira, Microsoft Exchange, and 17 websites, just to name a few. Some of the improvements they realized is in some of the key support metrics that they track, such as an 8% improvement in first call resolution after 1 quarter of implementing Coveo. Okay, so let's not delay any further. Paul, I'd like to pass it over to you to dig into the demo.
Sure, thank you, Rachel. I really appreciate that, and thanks for the great introduction as well. 1 second here to select my appropriate screen to share. So what we're going to do here today is actually show you a couple of examples to start off with of customers who've implemented Coveo on their customer self-service sites, effectively, their support content sites. And then we'll dig into in a little more detail the back end, both the agent experience using Coveo for Dynamics 365, and also the administration and analytics and reporting that Coveo provides around that as well. So starting off with really the end user view of content, of content provided from a wide variety of data sources, as you can see here. This is the Dell support site, relatively recent customer of Coveo, using us both internally and externally as well. As a user comes to the support site, they're looking for information. Coveo is able to make suggestions around queries based on, as Rachel had described, our machine learning applied to the usage analytics information that we track. That is to say, what have other people searched for? What have other people like me searched for? And what have they actually found good results for? So a good result really being something that gives a result at all, a query that gives a result at all, but also a query that gives results that users click on, and potentially results that do not lead to the creation of a support case. So that's really where the machine learning aspect of Kibeho comes into play here. In addition, of course, to the standard search capabilities that you'd expect on a site like this. As you can also see, the query suggestions that we're making here are, in fact, somewhat spelling insensitive. I'm intentionally misspelling printer driver here, but still being able to get good suggestions of queries back to me, and of course that leading to good query results as well. As you can see, also there are components that we'll refer to in a couple different places in today's demonstration, such as filters or facets over here on the left-hand side. I can easily drill down to certain kinds of content, again, derived from metadata that we index from whichever data source the content comes from. Content type, language, when was it last updated, and of course you can sort based on various selections as well. Certainly relevance, and again, relevance can be driven both by machine learning, surface good content automatically that other users have found useful, and of course also based on rules that the administrator of the Kibeho system can define to promote the best, what they think are the best results for specific queries. So that combination of manual and artificial intelligence or machine learning driven relevance is a really key part of what Kibeho provides in the customer self-service and the agent or customer support areas. One other example I'd like to show you of the use of Kibeho on a support environment is Logitech, and they use us on their portal site, which combines a bunch of different sources of information as well. There's certainly all results, as you can see. They have their knowledge base, they have a product catalog, they have downloads for various products, of course, and community discussion boards, and all of these are searchable by Kibeho. What I wanted to show you on this site really was, I think, the power of machine learning applied to automatic relevance tuning. I've done a query here for the word mouse, obviously on Logitech site. That's going to return me a lot of results, a lot of them in particular from the product catalog. The challenge, of course, when searching something like a product catalog is how to surface the best content, especially for very general queries like this. Now, in order to kind of do a more dramatic demo of this capability, you'll notice up at the top right, I have a couple of little yellow buttons on my screen, and this really just lets me enable or disable the automatic boosting that Kibeho's machine learning is doing on these results. Now, I've gone and done a query for the word mouse. Obviously, there's a lot of products that Logitech has that are mouses. The challenge, of course, is to figure out what's the best way to return these results. Now, as I mentioned, the administrator of the system can certainly define manual rules to say, here's what's on sale this month, or here's what is most popular, perhaps. But Kibeho is also able then to boost automatically what is more popular with users. And when I've actually disabled the machine learning boost, what we see here is really all the results are going to be ranked about equally. But interestingly, we start to get is some products like the flower mouse and the soccer mouse, which, while I'm sure they're wonderful products, are probably not the most popular Logitech device. If I actually enable that machine learning boosting, and it is enabled by default, if you go to their site, you won't see these yellow buttons. This is, again, just a script running in my browser. What we start to see, in fact, is automatically boosted, really the products that more people are searching for, are clicking on, are making use of from Logitech. And this is happening automatically. Once again, this is really machine learning applied to usage analytics information, user behavior, in order to tune relevance automatically. I did just want to introduce that as well. I think it's a key component of what Kibeho brings above and beyond what we might think of as relatively simple search capabilities. With that, I'd like to show you a little of really the focus of today's demonstration, which is Kibeho within the context of Microsoft Dynamics CRM. So Kibeho has developed a couple of aspects to our integration with Dynamics CRM. One, of course, being the back end, the indexing and so on of Dynamics content, in addition to all these other sources that Rachel was mentioning, whether it be SharePoint, other websites, other applications within your organization, wherever your content, your most useful content for your agents, for your customers is located, we can index that. But we have developed connectors, and I'll show you a little bit about how that works, to Microsoft Dynamics in particular, so that you can select which objects, cases, discussions, contacts, customer information, whichever information you want to be able to search and to bring up for an agent. The other aspect from the front end, which I'll show you in just a second, is Kibeho integration directly into the case management process. And in addition, Kibeho can take over the main search box here at the top of the screen within Dynamics. And it's interesting to compare what a simple Dynamics SQL search, if you will do versus the Kibeho search that takes over the search box. And just to show an example here, if I search for information about, I think there's a case about skipping floors, and I do this is the simple Microsoft SQL search, we actually don't get any information at all. Whereas if I do that from Kibeho, what we're going to see is a wide variety of information, both from Dynamics and indeed outside of Dynamics. So we can see all of the content. And this is a full search screen, one of the options available for Kibeho integration into Dynamics, where I can drill down to, for example, specific cases. There is, in fact, one. There's information in Confluence and Jira, whatever knowledge bases you're using, discussion groups like Lithium, for example, and of course, being able to drill down or to expand the scope of your query to everything. Once again, those same sort of components that you saw on the Dell site as an example, such as facets over here to enable me to dynamically drill down into certain kinds of content. And of course, tabs across the top is another interesting way to limit my results. Other components that we provide as part of the integration into Dynamics might include selections around the way in which content is going to be viewed. Is it a list or a card? What order I want my results sorted in, and so on. So this is certainly one approach to Kibeho integration into Dynamics. But I think what is really powerful from an agent point of view is the ability to use Kibeho within the context of case management. So I go into my Dynamics list of cases. I'm now an agent. I'm sorting my results by case number, and let me open up here a particular case here and show you what Kibeho looks like within that context. So I'm opening up my case. I'm just going to make a little better use of the available screen space. And what you can see now is on the right-hand side, this is a Kibeho, what we call Insight panel, which is automatically pulling back content relative to this case. Now you can configure which of the case fields, in fact, you want Kibeho Search to be based on. In this case, I believe it's the case title and perhaps some of the other description items here. And automatically, we're searching across all of these different data sources. And again, you can configure which ones are important to you, whether it be a SharePoint knowledge base, perhaps, discussion boards internal to your organization, or of course, other cases or resolutions that have been applied. Oops. Back that up a second here. And what we can see is, even though I haven't explicitly, done a search per se in this search box, we're automatically bringing back all these different types of content within the context of the agent's workflow. So I'm working on a case. I need to look at a variety of messages, perhaps. I can see the information here. I can figure out if this is, in fact, relevant to the case, and in fact, add that content, copy and paste that content, perhaps, into the case to help to resolve the case more quickly and efficiently without having to switch tabs between Dynamics and a search application. This is search relevance, really, insights, in fact, within the context of where I'm doing my work. So, as Rachel had described, this is really a game changer for our customers, such as Tyler Technologies, who are using Kibeho both in that main search screen, if you will, but also really in the context of where agents are doing their work. They can be more proficient, more effective at their jobs. They can find out if there's already been a resolution created for this particular page, or for this particular problem, pardon me, so that it can be reused rather than creating new articles to address the problem. Another interesting application to this, too, is with regard to the migration of what I guess I might call knowledge content. Very often, as you're moving, for example, to Dynamics 365 CRM as both a knowledge base and a case management platform, there's a challenge in migrating your content from wherever else it used to be, SharePoint, Wiki, whatever other knowledge base you might be using, into sort of a unified content repository like Dynamics. Well, what Kibeho can enable you to do is to really speed up that process or sidestep that process to a large extent, because you don't necessarily need to make that big migration, at least not. You don't need to migrate everything before you even get started using Dynamics. You can leave the content where it resides, index it using Kibeho, and make use of it within the context of Dynamics in the way in which we're looking at it right now. I did also want to show you a little bit about how Kibeho is really integrated into Dynamics from an indexing point of view. And to do that, I need to actually move into a separate section of Dynamics here, into the settings and setup here. So I can look at, as an example, how is Kibeho configured. So of course, as I think we'd mentioned earlier, the Kibeho components are in fact installed into Dynamics from AppSource, available from AppSource, in fact, as a trial as well, if you're interested in having a look at how this might work in your, say, sandbox environment before going any further with it. But this is, within Dynamics, the way in which you would configure the indexing of your Dynamics content. I will in a moment also show you how we configure Kibeho to index and search non-Dynamics content. But for the Dynamics content in particular, you manage it here from within this control panel that's installed in your Dynamics platform. I can click on the Edit button here, and this is going to bring me up configuration information about my Dynamics sources and how I'm indexing them. Certainly, security is important. We need to be able to use an appropriate authentication mechanism for indexing that Dynamics content. Obviously needs access to whichever entities or objects you might want to be searching. But you can see here that you can select the specific entities that you do want to index that are useful to you from the point of view of search or filtering or faceting or displaying or sorting. And you can see here the specific fields, in fact, that we've in fact selected for this particular source. So everyone uses Dynamics a little bit differently. There may be different fields, in fact, that you want to be able to search or to display or to sort on, for example. And you can see here that that it's really easy for you to select those particular objects or entities and fields. You can also, on this Relations tab, and this is pretty interesting too, you can also index as part of the a flattened searchable index these normalized database fields, such as the full name of an account contact, so that even though that this full name is stored really in a different entity in Dynamics, you can search it as part of your overall account mechanism here as well. So really quite powerful in terms of how Kibeho can flatten these multiple different diverse databases that you've got as part of your Dynamics your Dynamics implementation, and make them really very usable from an agent point of view. A couple of things I guess I'd like to show you while we're in here. This is also where an administrator really can define the search interfaces, and we've got a couple here. Certainly, there's that case console or insight panel that I showed you, and also the global search page. I'm trying to make it really easy for an administrator. Again, this is not something the individual agents would be doing typically, but an administrator can configure or make changes to the configuration of what these search pages look like. And it's a very intuitive drag and drop kind of interface to do things like create new tabs or modify what these tabs, for example, do, to drag and drop new facets perhaps onto the screen. You want another filter based on a particular field. And in fact, also to change the way in which results are laid out. So there are specific fields here being displayed for a particular piece of content. I can go in and I can edit the fields that in fact I want to display. We want to make this as easy as possible. This is all leveraging Kibeho's JavaScript framework that we use for search and for result display. And of course, if you want to, you can get into the code level here as well to make some deeper level changes to how that works. But it's all driven really by standard components that we provide. The idea being, let's make this easy. You don't necessarily need to be a developer to make changes to the way in which your search works and the way in which your search results are displayed to your agents or your end users. I would also like to show you a bit of what Kibeho looks like from an administration point of view outside of the world of Dynamics. Rachel had mentioned earlier, and I think this is a really important part of what Kibeho provides, are usage analytics capabilities. So Kibeho is logging all kinds of information about a user's context and what they're searching for and what results they get. By default, it's going to be, of course, things like the keywords or the terms that the user uses when they do a query, whether it's an explicit search or really an implicit search in that insight panel. When I'm looking at a case, a search is being performed on my behalf for the most important words within the case context. And it's also information about the user context. Where are they located physically, perhaps, based on their IP address? What kind of device are they on, a mobile versus non-mobile device? Of course, are they an agent or a customer? What part of the search page or the search experience are they in fact on? Is it within the insight panel? Is it a full search screen and so on? And of course, things like the top queries and top documents. And these dashboards and reports, very configurable, also very dynamic. If I go in here and I click on a particular query, I'll only see the contextual information and the top results and such for that particular query. And of course, I could drill in to show me what users from, for example, Italy have been searching for on my site. Other common things that you would use the usage analytics reports for might be what we often refer to as content gaps, queries where users don't get any results. This is often really interesting, especially from a customer self-service point of view, because when a user is on your site and is searching for something, they're telling you really explicitly what their issues are. So it's really important, and I think really important to understand what, for example, queries without results, or perhaps queries that don't lead to clicks, queries that do lead to support case creation. Really important to understand that for a few reasons. It might be that these are opportunities for you to create new content to address common user problems. It might also be that users are just using different terminology than you are when they're searching, different keywords. They use different acronyms, perhaps, than what you're using in the content you publish. So we do find that reviewing these reports, these dashboards frequently or relatively frequently can help you to tune what we call our query pipelines. Query pipelines are a term that we use to really talk about the rules for search, the business rules for how is search going to work. Do we define synonyms to address those sort of terminology issues? Do we define boosting rules or top results for particular kinds of searches where we know the right answer to a particular kind of question? You'll notice that we can define multiple different query pipelines. You might have different sets of rules for your agents versus your customers. One part of your site search versus another. Perhaps a product catalog search versus a support content search. There may be different rules involved. Let me show you a little bit about what a query pipeline consists of. As I've mentioned, the ability to create synonyms for particular searches. If a user is searching for ATM or bank machine or automated teller, we can expand the query to include all of those. And typically, I don't suggest that you try and recreate Roget's thesaurus here with a Kibeho thesaurus, but be very specific and address those sorts of queries from the usage analytics reports that, in fact, are challenging for your customers. Similarly, this is also where you can define top results for particular queries. So for a particular search, you might want to point the user to a given top result. This is also where you can define more general ranking expressions, and these are really boosting or burying rules in this case, based on typically metadata in your content. In this example here, we've decided that while we've indexed a whole lot of lithium content, discussion board content, there's an awful lot of it, and we don't want it to overwhelm the results that come back from other data sources. So we've in fact given a negative modifier to any content that comes from that particular source. If the user's query criteria, of course, match a message, it will be returned, but it will be returned lower in the result list. So you can tune your relevance both manually and, again, using machine learning, which is, again, applied to that usage analytics behavioral data. And I think important with regard to that, again, as you've noticed, there are more. I can define more than one query pipeline. I can also define A/B tests across these pipelines. So if you're defining some of those sort of boosting or burying rules for content, great idea to be able to test those. Essentially send 10% perhaps of your real users to pipeline A versus pipeline B and measure the results using those usage analytics reports. What's leading to better click-through? What's leading to better case creation or case deflection statistics? We often say, you can't improve what you can't measure. And to us, the usage analytics side of knowledge, of relevance, is especially key and something we've taken very seriously for a number of years now. I did also want to show briefly a bit of the management of other kinds of sources. So again, the ability to index multiple kinds of content repositories. We have our Dynamics index or source that we looked at a little bit earlier, but we certainly are able to index other websites, collaboration tools, other CRM platforms. Of course, SharePoint being very common in the Dynamics community as well. As an example here, defining a SharePoint source is a very straightforward process, again, requiring an appropriate authentication mechanism or a username and password to be able to read that content. You can select what types of content you want to include, what's the scope of indexing that you want to use for that SharePoint content. And again, we're indexing the full text of documents as well as the metadata around them in SharePoint as well, and being able to pull all that content into a single search result as needed. I'm going to go back to the usage analytics reports again, just for a moment, to talk a little more about the reporting on case creation and case deflection. This is Kibeho's had a lot of experience together with Microsoft and other CRM vendors in understanding what's important to measure and what's valuable to an organization in terms of how search interacts with knowledge, with content, and with customer self-service and customer service. So an example of the kinds of reports that our customers make use of in this context might include this deflection master report here. So understanding what is the best content, what is the content that's being used the most? What are the queries that lead to still case creation versus case deflection? It's really important to understand. Being able to log not just searches and clicks, but also events like, did the user create a case? Was the agent able to solve the case or close the case based on certain kinds of content? So this sort of information really helps you understand the return on investment of your knowledge, of your search, and indeed of your entire web experience from a self-service and agent productivity point of view. And even the adoption level of the content that you're creating as well. From an agent point of view, whose knowledge articles are in fact leading to the best case deflection or the most amount of usage by either agents or users. This can be a really interesting sort of statistic to measure as well as part of your potentially knowledge-centered service or knowledge-centered support approach. Well, with that, we're just about done for today's session. But what I'd like to do now is to, in fact, also bring up one more slide. So I did want to actually bring up this one last slide here to talk about, in general, Kibeho integrated into Microsoft Dynamics 365. We did talk about all the different types of sources that Kibeho provides support for, the indexing of, and of course the integration of Kibeho into the Dynamics experience, both from a customer point of view and an agent point of view. The ability to do things like automatically tune relevance based on user behavior, to make those more intelligent query suggestions, to deal with what we often refer to as long queries. What we refer to here as intelligent term detection, picking out the most useful words from a longer query and weighting those words more heavily in the user's search to address the kinds of challenges that people face with regard to voice search, perhaps, or chatbot search, or indeed even just the ability to search for content based on a long string of text in a case description. I'd also like to mention again, mention really briefly in passing that Kibeho is available on the Microsoft App Source, and you can get that free trial of Kibeho for Microsoft 365 from the App Source as well. And with that, Rachel, perhaps I'll hand back over to you to conclude today's session.
Great. Thanks so much, Paul. Thank you for walking us through the demonstration. We do have a bunch of questions that came in, so let's dive in. The first question I have here is about security and permissions. I really like this one. Is it possible to hide or only show certain types of content to customers or agents?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a great question, of course. So Kibeho does index along with the content of documents or pages or content at all, um, the permissions associated with that content. Now, this is going to vary a little bit depending on the type of data source you're dealing with, but certainly for Dynamics content, for SharePoint content, for many of these other applications that have permissions or security built into them, we index that information along with the content so that users, whether they're authenticated or not authenticated, will only get to see content that in fact they do have the rights to see. In addition to that, you can also filter results in other ways. So if it's not necessarily reliant on the permissions associated to that data source, that SharePoint source, that Dynamics source, but you only want to show certain parts of your website to your customers versus your end users, that can also be configured as well.
Okay, great, thank you. So next question I have is it possible to connect information that's on-premise as well as in the cloud?
Yeah, it is. There are a couple of approaches to that, and we do provide what we call an on-premises crawling module. So if, for example, you have database content or files on file servers within your environment, that on-premises crawling module can connect to those data sources and push the content to be indexed to the Kibeho cloud. The index does, in fact, reside in the cloud, but the connector can push content to the cloud to be indexed in obviously a secure manner, encrypted in transit and at rest, without requiring that you open an inbound port in your firewall to allow Kibeho access to your on-premises content sources.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and I just pulling up another question here. So, okay, so this one's about custom dynamics field. So I think, Paul, you already kind of covered this, but can you just to be clear, do you mind answering if it's possible for custom dynamics fields that can also be indexed and searched on?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I didn't really highlight it per se, but as I think we saw in the configuration of my Dynamics source, we're calling the Dynamics API to essentially get it to tell us what entities exist in this Dynamics environment, what fields exist for each entity, and so on. And so the administrator is able to select custom or standard entities and fields to, in fact, be indexed. It's a good question, and I appreciate it. I don't think I really highlighted the fact that custom objects or custom entities and fields can be indexed, but they can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for answering that. And then I've got a question here. Can you speak to a little bit about the difference between Dynamics Relevant Search and Kibeho Search?
Oh, sure. So Dynamics provides a few different options for search, of course. There is, as we saw, the very simple SQL search, which is really just a database lookup. It doesn't provide the sorts of relevance tuning that Kibeho can provide. It's really exact matches only, that sort of thing. So Kibeho really brings a full text configurability to search, and also the ability to group your results based on facets or data sources, and of course the ability to extend your query or your search beyond simply Dynamics database content. There are also options in Dynamics to make use of capabilities like Azure Search, which is becoming a more popular search option. But again, it doesn't Azure Search compared to Kibeho doesn't really give you the ability to extend the data sources that you want to index outside of the Microsoft world. It also doesn't provide you with really the rich usage analytics reporting and the machine learning that's based on that usage analytics information, that contextual information, in order to automatically learn and tune your results based on, well, either automatically or manually, based on the usage analytics information. So while there are a couple different options in Dynamics, Kibeho being one of them, for content search, we really feel that Kibeho gives you the broadest and most flexible approach to relevance.
Okay, great. Thank you. I've got two more questions in the queue for you, Paul, and then I think we can wrap up early unless anyone else wants to send any through, just feel free. So the next question, is this only for customer service module, for the customer service module, or can Kibeho Search also be used across Dynamics? And what about outside of Dynamics, like in SharePoint?
Oh, yeah, good questions. At this point, really within the Dynamics environment, Coveo is really used for Dynamics CRM. Not Dynamics AX as an example. Coveo can certainly be used outside of Dynamics as well. In fact, the first two examples I showed you today of Dell and Logitech, to be perfectly honest, they don't use Dynamics at all. Their content resides in a variety of different sources, web sources, other CRM systems, discussion boards, and such. And the user interface, of course, is not resident in Dynamics. So absolutely, Coveo is very much a platform, but we have built specific integrations, both on the back end and, if you will, the front end of Microsoft Dynamics. But it is not by any means the only environment in which Coveo can work. Integration into SharePoint in particular is an interesting question. You can build Coveo into, for example, a web part in SharePoint Online. So essentially building a search page that sits within SharePoint. Other integration options in SharePoint Online are, in fact, a little bit limited. We can't take over the search box in SharePoint Online today, although there is some talk about the possibility of that, really due to limitations that Microsoft imposes on how applications can integrate to SharePoint Online. But we can certainly search the SharePoint Online content. You could have a standalone search page, or, as we saw, of course, a search page embedded into Dynamics that searches your SharePoint content along with other things as well. I hope that helps to address what's actually a fairly broad question. Be happy to talk to you another time about the details of that.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Okay, and then the last question in the queue I have is about indexing content. So how long does it typically take for Coveo to index content? And also, what about syncing for content updates or changes?
Oh yeah, good question. Just given the time that we had for today's session, I didn't really dive into that sort of thing. How long it takes to index content is an interesting question, of course, because it really depends to a large extent on how responsive the source that we're indexing is to our requests. That said, when we're indexing Dynamics content, we are calling the Dynamics API to do that, to fetch entities and fields and such from Dynamics to be indexed. And it's really quite fast. I mean, it's going to be sub-second to index any individual updated Dynamics content. We do index based on a schedule. So you could set a refresh schedule to say once an hour or more frequently than that to pick up on changes that have happened to the Dynamics content. It's going to vary a little bit from source to source, as I mentioned, depending on how responsive they are. And of course, while we're re-indexing or refreshing our index, the index is still searchable. Everything that's already been indexed is still searchable. It's not like we have to take it offline while we update the index. It is continuously available, but it is typically done on a scheduled basis. You would, as an administrator, would define how frequently we should refresh that index and pick up what's new or updated or deleted.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Paul. So yeah, those were all the questions that we had. So I think now would be a really good time to wrap up the session. On behalf of Paul and the team here at Coveo, I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's live demonstration of AI-powered search for Microsoft Dynamics 365.